The young black gardener attracted silent glances from the millionaire office owner. When passion began to bloom between them, an unexpected event changed everything. The office was huge, modern, and smelled of success. Dark marble floors, shiny surfaces, and towering green plants that seemed to be the only soft thing in that harsh world of glass and steel. Naomi was 20, her skin the color of night. Her hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her clothes were plain. She moved between the plants with a watering can, careful and focused. She loved her job, even if the pay wasn't great. She liked how the plants needed her, how they depended on her care. As she moved from one plant to another, she could feel eyes on her. She looked up, and there he was again, the owner of the building. He stood in his suit, his hands in his pockets, watching her. Naomi kept her head down. She didn't want trouble, but his eyes lingered, and she could feel it. Every day he would be there, sometimes talking with someone else, sometimes just looking. His gaze was intense, but not threatening. It made her feel strange. She wondered why he looked at her. One day, he walked up to her. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. He smiled, and it wasn't a big smile, just a soft one. "These plants," he said, "you take good care of them." Naomi looked at him. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded. He asked her about them, and she talked. He seemed genuinely interested. They talked for a few minutes. She found herself laughing at something he said about the office needing more color. It surprised her, the way it was easy to talk to him. As she spoke, she glanced across the room. His wife was there, blonde, tall, dressed in expensive clothes. She wasn't smiling. She was watching them, her eyes cold. Naomi felt her stomach drop. She quickly ended the conversation and returned to her work. That night, Naomi walked home. The city was loud, the people pushing past her. She lived in a small room, far from the shiny office where she worked. It was a cramped space with a mattress, a small table, and a tiny window. She put her bag down and sat by the window. She thought about her day, about his smile, about his wife's stare. The next morning, Naomi was back at work. She tried to ignore him, but every day he found her, asking her about the plants or just talking about the weather. And every time, his wife was there too. She never said anything to Naomi, but her eyes were sharp. Naomi could feel the tension growing. A few days later, Naomi was kneeling, trimming the leaves of one of the taller plants. She heard footsteps, and there he was again. He knelt beside her, complimenting her work. Naomi looked up, her eyes catching his, and then they heard a voice. His wife stood there, her face hard, her mouth a tight line. "What are you doing?" she said, her voice cold. Naomi straightened up, feeling heat rise in her face. She didn't know what to say. The millionaire looked at his wife, his smile fading. He stood up slowly, and Naomi could feel the tension in the air. "Just talking," he said simply. The wife's eyes flicked to Naomi. There was a coldness there that Naomi felt deep. She swallowed, nodding slightly, and turned back to her work, her hands shaking slightly. She heard them arguing quietly as they walked away. Naomi's stomach twisted. She had a feeling things were about to change, and not for the better. 2 days later, the wife approached Naomi while she was working. She was alone this time. No husband, no smiles. Her voice was low, her eyes narrowed. "You think you can just talk to him? Stay in your place," she said. Naomi felt her face go hot. She opened her mouth to say something, but the woman turned and left before she could. The rest of the day, Naomi felt sick. She didn't know what to do. She didn't have anyone to talk to about it. The next day, Naomi went to work with a heavy heart. She moved through her usual tasks, trying to keep her head down. But by the afternoon, the wife's words were all she could hear in her mind. She felt it coming like a storm, and she knew it wouldn't be long before it hit. Later, when Naomi was finishing up for the day, the wife called her over. Her voice was clipped and harsh. She told Naomi that her services were no longer required. Naomi stood there, stunned, unable to respond. "You're done here. We don't need you anymore," the wife said, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Naomi packed up her things, her hands shaking. She walked out of the building, her heart heavy. She tried not to cry, but it felt like her whole world was falling apart. The job had been hard, but it was hers. It was what kept her going. She walked through the city, her eyes staring at nothing. She ended up in the small garden near her apartment, sitting on the bench, her bag at her feet. The air was cool, and she could hear children playing somewhere in the distance. She tried to focus on the sounds of the leaves rustling, on the plants swaying gently. This was where she felt safe. But now, everything felt out of reach, like she was slipping, losing her grip on what little she had. She closed her eyes, feeling lost and alone. The next day, Naomi tried to find another job, but it was like every door was shut. The wife must have spread rumors. Every place she went, they looked at her with suspicion or just shook their heads before she could even speak. It was as if she was invisible, a shadow moving through the city. She found herself back at the garden. She still came to care for the plants there. It was unpaid, but it was all she had left. She knelt down, her hands in the dirt, trying to find some kind of peace. The plants didn't judge her. They didn't ask questions. And then, one day, as she worked, she heard a familiar voice. "Naomi." She looked up, and there he was, the millionaire, standing there in the garden. He looked different, not in his suit, his eyes searching hers. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice softer now, like he knew he couldn't make things right, but wanted to try. Naomi stood up, wiping her hands on her pants. She looked at him, her eyes hard. "Why are you here?" she asked. He took a step closer, his eyes full of regret. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I came to find you." Naomi shook her head. She didn't know what to think, didn't know if she could trust him. "You think you can just show up and fix this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I lost my job. I lost everything because of you." He reached out, but she stepped back. The air was thick between them, filled with things unsaid. "I want to help," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then turned away. She didn't know what she wanted, but she knew she couldn't let herself get hurt again. Not by him, not by anyone. She bent back down to the plants, her fingers brushing the leaves. She heard him behind her, still standing there, waiting. "Please," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Let me make it right." Naomi didn't answer. She just kept working, her heart pounding in her chest. Naomi returned to the office the next day, her head heavy with what had happened. She kept her eyes on the plants, watering and trimming without looking up. She didn't want any trouble, not after the scene with the millionaire's wife. She didn't know if he would come over again, or if he would even be allowed to. But he did. He appeared at her side, a soft smile on his face. Naomi stiffened, glancing around to see if his wife was nearby. He noticed and spoke quietly. "It's okay. She's not here today." Naomi nodded, but said nothing. He started talking about the plants again, his tone light, almost as if nothing had happened. Naomi found herself relaxing, her shoulders dropping a bit. His voice was easy, and he asked her about how she knew so much about plants. "My mom taught me," Naomi said quietly, her eyes on the leaves she was trimming. She loved gardening. The millionaire nodded, his eyes softening. "She must have been a good teacher." Naomi smiled, a small, almost sad smile. She missed her mother every day. But here, talking about her, felt a little comforting. Over the next few days, he continued to come by. Sometimes he would bring her a coffee, or just stay for a few minutes, talking about his day or asking about hers. Naomi knew it was risky. She knew his wife was always somewhere, watching, but she couldn't help it. She liked talking to him. He made her laugh, and it had been a long time since she had someone to laugh with. One afternoon, he brought flowers to the office. They were bright, beautiful blooms, and he placed them on the receptionist's desk. Naomi watched from a distance, her heart pounding. He caught her eye and smiled. Naomi quickly looked away, her face warm. Later, while she was arranging some plants near the front entrance, she heard footsteps. She turned, and there was the wife, her face cold as ice. "You think those flowers are for you?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Naomi swallowed, shaking her head. She kept her eyes on the floor, feeling the weight of the woman's stare. The wife stepped closer, her voice lowering. "Stay away from him. Do your job and nothing more," she hissed before walking away. Naomi's hands trembled as she went back to work. She felt small, like she was shrinking under the weight of the woman's words. She didn't know why she felt this connection with the millionaire, but she knew it was dangerous. She tried to avoid him after that. She focused on her work, kept her head down, and ignored the warmth that came with his presence. But the next day, he found her again. "Hey, Naomi," he said, his voice gentle. She didn't look up. "I think we should stop talking," she said, her voice almost a whisper. He paused, his smile fading. "Why?" Naomi glanced around, her eyes landing on the receptionist, who was watching them closely. She shook her head. "It's just not a good idea," she said, her throat tightening. He nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face. "I understand," he said, but his voice held a note of disappointment. The rest of the day was quiet. Naomi felt the weight of the silence, and it hurt more than she expected. She missed his voice, missed the way he would make her laugh, but she knew it was for the best. She couldn't risk losing her job, not for something that was never meant to be. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the office to find a bouquet of flowers on her workbench. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked around, but no one was there. She knew who they were from. She picked up the card. "Thank you for the smiles, M." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She wanted to smile, but instead, she felt tears well up in her eyes. She couldn't do this. She couldn't let herself fall for something that was bound to hurt her. She heard footsteps and quickly put the card in her pocket. The wife appeared, her eyes narrowing when she saw the flowers. "So, you're still here," she said, her voice cold. Naomi looked down, her heart pounding. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly. The wife stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. "You think you're special? You think he cares about you," she said, her face twisted in anger. "You're nothing but a gardener." Naomi felt her face flush. She didn't answer, just turned back to her work, her hands shaking. The wife stared at her for a moment longer before turning and walking away, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew she had to stay away from him. She had to protect herself, protect her job. But it was hard. It was so hard when he made her feel seen, made her feel like she mattered. That afternoon, she was working in one of the smaller rooms when she heard voices outside. She looked up, and there they were, the millionaire and his wife. They were arguing, their voices low but tense. Naomi couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could feel the tension, the anger. She quickly turned back to her work, trying to block out the sound. She didn't want to be involved. She didn't want to be the cause of their problems. But she couldn't help the ache in her chest, the feeling that this was all her fault. The door opened suddenly, and the wife stormed in, her face flushed with anger. She looked at Naomi, her eyes blazing. "You!" she spat, pointing at Naomi. "You're done here." "Pack your things." Naomi stood there, stunned. "What? I didn't do anything," she stammered, her heart pounding. The wife stepped closer, her face twisted with rage. "You think I don't see what's going on? You think I'm blind?" she shouted. "You're fired. Get out." Naomi felt tears well up in her eyes. She looked past the wife to the millionaire, who stood in the doorway, his face pale. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching. Naomi nodded slowly, her throat tight. She turned and walked away, her vision blurred with tears. She packed her things in silence, her hands trembling. She didn't look at anyone as she walked out of the office for the last time. Outside, the air was cool, and Naomi took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She felt lost, like her world was falling apart. She didn't know what she was going to do, where she was going to go. All she knew was that she couldn't stay there anymore. She walked through the city, her feet carrying her to the small garden near her apartment. She sat on the bench, her bag at her feet, and let the tears fall. She had lost everything: her job, her hope, the small piece of happiness she had found in those moments with him. Naomi wiped her eyes, looking around the garden. The plants were still there, still growing, still alive. She took a deep breath, trying to find some comfort in that. She would find a way to keep going. She had to. Naomi stayed away from the office after the confrontation. She tried to blend in, to make herself small and invisible, but that wasn't enough. It was a quiet morning when the millionaire approached her again. He found her in one of the side rooms, trimming a large fern, her back turned. She heard his footsteps, soft but unmistakable. "Naomi," he said, his voice a little hesitant. She didn't turn right away. She took a moment, finishing the cut she was making, then looked up at him. "We shouldn't be talking," she said, keeping her voice low. She didn't want anyone to hear. He stepped closer, his eyes sincere. "I know things have been tough. I wanted to explain." Naomi shook her head, stepping back slightly. She didn't want his explanations. She didn't need them. But he continued, "I never meant to cause any trouble. I like talking to you, that's all." He looked almost boyish, the way he scratched his head. I don't have many people I can talk to. Not like this." She paused, her hands tightening on the shears. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to think he wasn't just playing with her. But there were so many reasons to stay away. She looked up, and his eyes were pleading, searching hers for some kind of answer. "What do you want from me?" Naomi asked, her voice almost a whisper. She felt her throat tighten, a heavy weight in her chest. She was scared, but she also wanted to know. Was there anything real here? Or was this just another rich man's game? He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could answer, they heard footsteps. Fast, angry, it was her, his wife. She burst into the room, her eyes blazing with fury. Naomi felt her stomach drop. "What is this?" the wife demanded, her voice sharp and filled with venom. "What are you doing in here?" She looked at Naomi, her eyes narrowing. "Flirting with my husband." Naomi's face burned. She shook her head, but the words wouldn't come. The millionaire stepped forward, trying to calm his wife. "It's not what you think," he started, but she wasn't listening. "Not what I think," she shouted. "I've seen how you look at her, how you talk to her. She's nothing but a gardener, and you disgrace us both." Naomi felt tears sting her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She turned, trying to escape, but the wife wasn't done. She stepped closer to Naomi, her voice cold and final. "You're done here. You're fired," she spat. Naomi felt her heart stop. She looked at the millionaire, hoping he'd say something, that he'd stand up for her. But he just stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide. He didn't say a word. Naomi nodded, her throat tight, the humiliation washing over her. She turned and walked out, her legs feeling like they might give way. She didn't look back. She just kept walking until she was out of the building. Outside, the city was loud, bustling. People moved past her, each lost in their own lives. Naomi found a bench and sat, her hands still trembling. She had known something like this would happen, but it still hurt more than she thought it would. She felt like she was sinking, like the world around her was swallowing her whole. She needed to find another job. She needed to keep going. But every place she went, the answer was the same. No one was hiring, or they didn't even let her finish her pitch. The wife must have spread rumors. It felt like she was blacklisted, and she had no idea what she was going to do next. After a week of rejections, Naomi found herself back at the small garden near her home. It wasn't much, but it was something she could still do. She knelt down, her fingers in the dirt, pulling at the weeds, trying to find some kind of peace. The garden had always been her refuge, a place where she could lose herself, if only for a little while. And then, one day, as she worked, she heard a familiar voice. "Naomi." She looked up, and there he was, the millionaire. He looked tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping. His clothes were less sharp, his hair a little messy. Naomi stood, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to go away. But instead, she just stared. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said, "but I had to find you. I'm sorry. I should have done something. I should have stopped her." Naomi swallowed, her throat tight. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a step forward, his hands reaching for hers, but stopping just short. "I want to help," he said. "I want to make this right." She shook her head, stepping back. "You can't fix this. You just stood there. You let her. You let her destroy everything." He looked down, shame on his face. I know I failed you, but I want to try. Please." Naomi turned away, her hands trembling. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to let herself hope. But there was something in his voice, something that made her pause. You really think you can just show up here and everything will be okay? She asked, her voice harsh. I lost my job because of you. I lost everything. He nodded, his eyes pained. I know, and I can't change that. But I can help you find something else. I can make sure you're okay. Naomi turned to face him, her eyes hard. And what about her? She asked. What happens when she finds out? He didn't have an answer. He just stood there, his eyes searching hers. Naomi took a deep breath, the weight of everything pressing down on her. I can't trust you, she said finally. I can't let myself be hurt again. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. I understand, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But I'll be here. If you need me, I'll be here. Naomi didn't respond. She just turned back to the garden, her hands finding the dirt, the weeds. She heard him leave, his footsteps fading until there was nothing but the sound of the city, the wind through the leaves. She closed her eyes, her chest tight. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know if she could ever forgive him. But part of her, deep down, still hoped. Naomi kept her days busy with whatever small tasks she could find. She couldn't afford to fall apart. The garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. She still didn't have a job, but at least she had this. The community garden was full of color, and taking care of it brought her a small sense of purpose. A week had passed since she last saw him. She didn't know if he would come back, and part of her hoped he wouldn't. It was easier that way. She didn't need reminders of what she had lost or the confusing emotions he stirred in her. But one afternoon, while she was trimming some overgrown branches, she heard that familiar voice again. Naomi? She looked up, and there he was, standing by the entrance. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He looked normal. Jeans, a simple shirt. He even looked unsure of himself, as if he didn't quite know what to do with his hands. Naomi straightened, brushing her hands on her pants. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tired. He walked closer, stopping just a few steps away. I wanted to check on you, he said, his voice soft. I know things have been difficult. Naomi raised an eyebrow, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Yeah, you could say that. He sighed, nodding. I know, and I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. He paused, then added, I should have stopped her. Naomi looked at him, her eyes narrowing. Why didn't you? She asked. You just stood there. He didn't look away, his eyes full of regret. I was scared, he said simply. I know that's not an excuse, but I didn't know what to do. She's my wife. But I never wanted this. I never wanted you to be hurt. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave her alone. But part of her wanted to understand. She crossed her arms, her gaze hard. So now what? She asked. You think you can just come here and fix everything? He shook his head. No, I know I can't fix it. But I want to try to make it better. I can help you find another job. I know people... Naomi interrupted him, her voice rising slightly. I don't want your pity, she said. I don't want you to just throw money at this or make a call to fix things. It's not that simple. He looked down, nodding slowly. I get it, he said. I know it's not simple. But I care about you, Naomi. I don't know why, but I do. And I can't just walk away. Naomi felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, but it was hard. It was hard to let herself hope after everything that had happened. She looked away, focusing on the plants, the leaves rustling softly in the breeze. "You don't even know me," she said finally. "You know nothing about my life, about what I've been through." He took a small step forward, his eyes gentle. Then, "Let me in," he said. "Let me get to know you. I want to understand. I want to be here for you." Naomi shook her head, her voice breaking. "It's not that easy. Your life, it's so different from mine. You have money, power. You can walk away from this whenever you want. But I'm the one who gets hurt." He nodded, his eyes filled with pain. "I know, but I'm not walking away. I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to, but because I want to." Naomi swallowed, her eyes burning. She turned back to the garden, her hands finding comfort in the leaves, in the dirt beneath her fingers. She heard him step closer, his presence warm beside her. "Please, Naomi," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Give me a chance to prove myself. I want to help." Naomi took a deep breath, the silence between them stretching out. She didn't know what to do, what to think. She felt lost, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, not sure if she should take the leap. She finally looked up at him, her eyes tired. "You really want to help?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes hopeful. "Yes, whatever it takes." Naomi paused, then nodded slowly. "Fine, but I'm not going to make it easy for you," she said, her voice firm. "You want to be in my life. Then prove it. Show me that you're serious." He smiled, a small, hopeful smile. "I will, I promise." They stood there for a moment, the garden quiet around them. Naomi didn't know if she was making the right choice, but for now, she was willing to give him a chance. She didn't trust him, not fully, but maybe, just maybe, he could prove her wrong. She turned back to the plants, her hands brushing the leaves again. He stood beside her, not saying anything, just watching her work. The silence was different this time. It wasn't heavy or filled with tension. It was almost comfortable. He knelt beside her, picking up a small trowel. "Teach me," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. Naomi looked at him, surprised. She paused, then nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "All right," she said, "but don't expect me to go easy on you." He laughed, the sound light, almost relieved. "I wouldn't expect anything less." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Naomi felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe this wouldn't end the way she feared. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something good to come out of all of this. The next few days were different for Naomi. She still didn't have a job, but somehow she didn't feel as alone. The millionaire, whose name she finally started using, David, came to the garden each day. He kept his word, showing up early in the afternoon, often in jeans and a simple shirt. Nothing that screamed the corporate world she was used to seeing him in. At first, Naomi kept her guard up, not letting herself get too comfortable around him. But David was persistent, and not in a pushy way. He would ask her about the plants, ask her to teach him what she knew. She found herself explaining the way certain flowers needed more light, or how the soil needed to be treated for some vegetables. He listened, genuinely interested, and she couldn't help but warm up to his curiosity. One day, as they worked, David paused and looked at Naomi, his face more serious. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Naomi looked at him, her hands covered in dirt. Depends on the question, she replied, trying to keep her tone light. David took a breath. What happened with your family? He asked, his voice gentle. You mentioned your mom taught you about gardening, but you haven't said much more. Naomi's heart tightened. She looked down, her fingers digging into the soil. She didn't talk about her past much. It was hard, too painful. But David's eyes were sincere, and she felt like maybe she could trust him, at least a little. My mom died when I was young, she said quietly. She was all I had. After she died, it was just me. I didn't have anyone else. David's face softened. I'm so sorry, Naomi. That must have been so hard. Naomi nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I had to grow up fast. I had to take care of myself, find ways to survive. Gardening was a way to feel close to her. It was the only thing that felt right. David was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice low. You're stronger than anyone I know. Naomi looked at him, her eyes misty. She wasn't used to people seeing her like that. She was used to being overlooked, to being just the girl who took care of the plants. But David saw her, really saw her, and it made her chest ache in a way she wasn't used to. What about you? Naomi asked, changing the subject. What's your story? You've got money, power, but are you happy? David looked down, a sad smile tugging at his lips. Not really, he admitted. I have everything I'm supposed to want, but most days it feels empty. My marriage. It's been over for a long time. We just keep up appearances because it's easier that way. It's what people expect. Naomi listened, her heart softening a little more. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the way he carried the weight of expectations. It was a different kind of struggle from hers, but it was real, and she understood it. Why do you stay? She asked. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I guess I'm afraid of what comes after. Afraid of being alone. It's stupid. I know. Naomi shook her head. It's not stupid. Everyone's afraid of being alone. They worked in silence for a while after that, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Naomi didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she didn't have to face everything by herself. Later that day, David looked at Naomi as they packed up their tools. Would you let me take you to dinner? He asked. His voice was soft, unsure. Naomi looked at him, her heart pounding. She hesitated. She didn't want to get hurt. She didn't want to open herself up just to be let down again, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes, the hope. She took a deep breath, then nodded. All right, she said, but don't think this means I trust you completely. David smiled, relief washing over his face. I wouldn't expect anything less. The evening of their dinner, David picked her up in a car that wasn't flashy, just simple. He dressed casually, nothing like the businessman she first knew. Naomi appreciated that. It made her feel like this was something real, not just another part of his life he could drop whenever it suited him. They went to a small restaurant, tucked away from the bustling parts of the city. It wasn't crowded, and the dim lighting made everything feel more relaxed. Naomi still felt on edge, unsure of how the night would go, but David did his best to make her comfortable. They talked about their lives, about their hopes and fears. David shared stories of his childhood, the pressures he faced from a young age to take over his family's business, to live up to the expectations placed on him. Naomi shared her struggles too, how she had fought to keep herself afloat after her mother passed, the loneliness she had endured. It felt good, letting it out. It felt good to talk to someone who listened, who cared. By the end of the night, Naomi found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in a long while. David watched her, his eyes soft, and Naomi felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. After dinner, David walked her back to her apartment building. They stood outside, the night air cool around them. Naomi looked at him, her heart heavy with emotions she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight." David smiled. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come." Naomi nodded, biting her lip. She still didn't know what would happen, if this could be anything more than just a moment. But for now, she was willing to take it one step at a time. "Good night, David," she said softly. "Good night, Naomi." He watched her go inside, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. She still had her doubts, her fears, but maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something better. She wasn't ready to trust completely, but she was willing to try, and for now, that was enough. The days after their dinner were a mix of nervousness and hope for Naomi. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but David kept showing up. He still came to the garden, still helped her with the plants, and still listened. He didn't push her for more than she was ready to give, and Naomi appreciated that. It was a slow, cautious process, but it felt real. One afternoon, as they were working side by side, David paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Naomi, I've been thinking," he started, his voice hesitant. She looked up at him, curious. "About what?" He took a breath, glancing around the garden as if gathering his thoughts. "I think we both need a break. From everything, from this city, from all the expectations. I know it sounds crazy, but what if we went away for a bit?" Naomi's eyes widened. "Go away?" she repeated, not sure if she heard him right. "Like a trip?" David nodded, his eyes hopeful. "Yeah, just the two of us. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can just be ourselves. No pressure, no expectations." Naomi felt her heart pound. The idea was tempting, but it was also terrifying. She didn't have money to travel, and she certainly didn't want to depend on him financially. The whole concept felt risky, too risky. What if it all fell apart? What if she ended up even more hurt than before? "I don't know, David," she said slowly. "That's a big step, and I can't afford to go on a trip." David shook his head quickly. "I don't want you to worry about the cost. I just want us to have a chance to really know each other, away from all the noise. I want you to feel safe, to feel like this could be real." He paused, then added, "I know it's a lot to ask. I want to try." Naomi looked at him, her mind swirling with doubts and fears, but there was also a small part of her that wanted to say yes. She had spent so long being cautious, so long guarding herself against the world. Maybe it was time to take a chance, but she wasn't ready to let go of everything completely. "If I agree," she said, her voice steady, "it has to be on my terms. I need to know that this is about more than just running away from your problems." David nodded, his expression earnest. "Of course. Whatever you need, Naomi. I want this to be right for both of us." She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She thought of her small apartment, her empty fridge, the endless struggle of trying to make ends meet. She thought of the loneliness, of the fear of trusting someone again. But then she looked at David, at the hope in his eyes. and she felt something inside her soften. "Okay," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We can try it, but I'm not making any promises." David's face broke into a smile, relief washing over him. "That's all I'm asking," he said. They spent the next few days planning. David wanted it to be special, but not extravagant. He understood that Naomi didn't want to be overwhelmed, that she needed simplicity. He suggested they go to a small cabin in the countryside, away from the city and all its noise. It would be quiet, just them and nature. Naomi agreed, feeling both excited and nervous. She hadn't taken a trip like this in, well, ever. On the day of the trip, David picked her up early in the morning. Naomi stood outside her building, her small bag at her feet. She had packed light, just the essentials. She didn't want to bring too much, didn't want to make this more than it was. David pulled up in a simple car, and when he got out, he smiled at her, his eyes soft. "You ready?" he asked. Naomi nodded, her stomach fluttering with nerves. "Yeah, I think so." He picked up her bag, putting it in the trunk, then opened the door for her. Naomi got in, taking a deep breath as she buckled her seatbelt. David got in beside her, starting the car. He glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you for trusting me," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him, her heart pounding. "Just don't give me a reason to regret it," she said, her voice serious. David nodded. "I won't." The drive out of the city was long, but it was peaceful. The further they got from the noise, the more Naomi felt herself relax. The buildings gave way to fields, the roads winding through green landscapes. Naomi watched the scenery pass by, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. They reached the cabin in the late afternoon. It was small, cozy, nestled between tall trees. There was a little porch with 2 chairs, and Naomi could hear the sound of birds in the distance. David parked the car, and they both got out, standing there for a moment, just taking it all in. "This is nice," Naomi said, her voice soft. She hadn't known what to expect, but this felt right. It felt like somewhere she could breathe. David smiled. "I'm glad you think so. I wanted it to be a place where we could just be ourselves." Naomi nodded, her heart still pounding. But there was also a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in a long time. They went inside, and Naomi looked around. The cabin was simple, with a small kitchen, a couch, and a fireplace. There was a single bedroom, and Naomi felt a small pang of anxiety. But David noticed. "You can have the bed," he said quickly. "I'll take the couch." Naomi looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks." They spent the rest of the day settling in. David made them dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad. But it was good. They ate on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees, the air cool and fresh. Naomi found herself relaxing, the tension she had carried for so long slowly fading. After dinner, they sat on the porch, the stars coming out above them. Naomi looked up, her heart feeling lighter. She turned to David, her voice quiet. "Why did you want this?" she asked. "Why me?" David looked at her, his eyes soft. "Because you're real, Naomi. You're not like anyone else I've ever met. You see the world in a way that I've forgotten how to. You make me want to be better, to be more." Naomi felt her throat tighten, her eyes misty. She wasn't used to hearing things like that, wasn't used to being seen in that way. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can be what you want," she said. David reached out, his hand gently touching hers. "I don't want you to be anything but yourself. That's all I need." Naomi looked at him, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, if this was something that could last. But for now, she was willing to take the chance. She was willing to trust, even if it scared her. She nodded, her voice soft. "Okay." They sat there, the silence comfortable, the stars shining above them. Naomi still had her doubts, her fears, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she wasn't alone anymore. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something real. The morning came quietly at the cabin. Naomi woke to the sound of birds chirping, their melodies carrying through the open window. The sunlight streamed in, warm and soft, touching the edges of her blanket. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the simplicity of the cabin feeling like a dream. She turned her head and saw David sleeping on the couch, his arm draped over his face. He looked peaceful, his guard down, not the polished businessman she'd first met. Naomi quietly got up, tiptoeing past David and stepping outside. The cool morning air greeted her, and she breathed it in deeply. She walked out to the edge of the porch and looked out at the trees, their branches swaying in the breeze. Everything felt still, calm, and it made her heart ache a little. It was rare for her to feel like this, safe and untethered from the worries that usually weighed her down. David stirred inside, and a moment later, he joined her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was still in his wrinkled t-shirt and jeans from the night before. He looked at Naomi, a sleepy smile spreading across his face. "Morning," he said, his voice groggy. "Morning," she replied, her own smile tugging at her lips. They stood there in silence for a moment, just taking in the calm of the morning. Naomi liked this side of David, the one without all the polish and perfection, the side that felt like he was just a person, like her. David turned to her, his expression soft. "I was thinking maybe we could go for a walk after breakfast. There's a trail that loops around the lake nearby. It's supposed to be really pretty." Naomi nodded. "Yeah, that sounds nice." She hadn't had a chance to explore much, and being out in nature was something she loved. It reminded her of being a kid, of the times her mom would take her to the park, showing her the different plants, teaching her about them. They went inside, and David made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. Naomi helped, cutting up some fruit, the two of them moving easily around the small kitchen. It felt normal, natural, like they'd done this 100 times before. They ate at the small table, sunlight pouring in through the window, warming the room. After breakfast, they cleaned up, and then David led her to the trail. It was just a short walk from the cabin, and soon they were surrounded by trees, the path winding gently through the woods. The air was fresh, and Naomi felt herself relaxing, the tension that she carried slowly melting away. David walked beside her, his hands in his pockets. He didn't say much, just pointed out a bird or a flower here and there. Naomi appreciated that. She liked the quiet, the peace that came with being out here. They reached the edge of the lake, and Naomi stopped, looking out at the water. It was still, the surface reflecting the sky above. David looked at her, his eyes soft. "You okay?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Yeah, I feel like I can breathe out here." She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "It's been a long time since I felt like that." David smiled, stepping closer. "I'm glad. That's why I wanted us to come here, just to get away from everything, from all the pressure." Naomi looked down, her fingers brushing a small rock on the ground. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. "You know, it's hard for me to trust this. To trust you," she said quietly. David nodded, his face serious. "I know. I get it. I know I have to earn it. And I'm okay with that. I'm not going anywhere, Naomi. I'm here because I want to be." Naomi looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. She could see the sincerity there, the way he meant every word. It scared her, letting someone in, but she also felt like maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's keep trying." David smiled, a warmth spreading across his face. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Naomi hesitated, then let him take her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, like a step forward. They continued walking, their hands loosely clasped, the path winding along the edge of the lake. They didn't need to say much. The silence was comfortable, the air filled with the sounds of birds, the rustling of leaves. Naomi felt herself opening up, little by little, the walls she had built around herself slowly crumbling. They spent the rest of the day at the cabin, taking it easy, cooking dinner together again. Naomi found herself laughing at David's clumsy attempts to chop vegetables, his concentration almost comical. He smiled, enjoying the way her laughter filled the space, the way it made everything feel lighter. As the sun began to set, they went back out to the porch, sitting on the steps. Naomi looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to appear. She turned to David, her voice soft. "Thank you for this," she said, "for bringing me here. I didn't know how much I needed this." David looked at her, his eyes gentle. "I think we both needed it," he said. "A chance to just be ourselves." Naomi nodded. She looked at him, her heart pounding a little. "So, what happens when we go back?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "What happens then?" David sighed, looking out at the trees. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to be with you, Naomi. I know that. But I also know things are complicated. My life, it's not simple." Naomi bit her lip, her chest tightening. "I don't want to be a secret," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't be that." David turned to her, his eyes earnest. "I don't want you to be a secret either. I know I need to make changes, to figure things out, and I will. I just need time." Naomi looked down, her fingers playing with a loose thread on her shirt. She didn't know if she could trust that, if she could trust him to really follow through. But she also knew that she wanted to try. She wanted to believe that this could be different, that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good. "Okay," she said finally, "but I need you to promise me that you'll be honest about everything." David nodded, his face serious. "I promise, no more secrets." Naomi looked at him, her heart aching with hope and fear. She nodded, leaning back, her eyes on the stars. She still didn't know what would happen next, but for now, she was willing to take it one day at a time. They stayed out there until the air grew cool, the stars bright above them. Naomi leaned her head against David's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. The next morning, they packed up to leave the cabin. Naomi felt a pang of sadness as she looked around the small space, but she also felt ready. She knew that they couldn't stay there forever, that they had to face the real world eventually. David loaded the car, and they drove back to the city in silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. When they reached Naomi's building, David turned to her, his eyes serious. "I meant what I said, Naomi. I'm not going anywhere. I'll figure things out. For us." Naomi looked at him, her heart full. She nodded, her voice soft. "I'm counting on it." David smiled, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. Naomi nodded, getting out of the car. She watched as he drove away, her heart heavy but hopeful. She turned and walked up to her apartment, her steps light. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she was willing to see where this path would lead. Naomi's days felt a little brighter after the trip. There was something about stepping away from everything and spending that time with David that gave her hope. He kept his promise to call, checking on her every day. Sometimes he would visit the garden, and they would talk. Sometimes just about little things, nothing too heavy. It felt nice, like they were building something real. As Christmas approached, David brought up the idea again. A trip, just the two of them. This time, he suggested something even more daring. A Christmas getaway, somewhere far from the city. Somewhere they could just be free of all the complications and expectations. Naomi was hesitant. The last trip had been good, but it was still a lot to take in. She wasn't used to trusting people like this, wasn't used to letting herself be open to someone else. But David's enthusiasm was hard to ignore. He spoke of the place he had in mind, a small cabin near a snowy town, decorated with Christmas lights, cozy and quiet. He promised it wouldn't be anything grand, just the two of them, and maybe it could be their way of starting over, away from all the pressures. Naomi finally agreed, with one condition. "I need to know that this isn't just you running away from everything," she said firmly. "This isn't just about escaping your life, David. If we're doing this, it has to mean something." David nodded, his eyes serious. "I understand, Naomi. I promise. I want this to mean something for both of us." The day of their departure arrived, and Naomi stood outside her apartment building, her suitcase by her side. David pulled up, the car loaded with everything they would need for their holiday trip. He stepped out, smiling at her, his face bright despite the cold air. "Ready for a Christmas adventure?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. Naomi smiled, though her nerves fluttered in her stomach. "I guess we'll see how it goes," she said. David took her bag, loading it into the car. He opened the door for her, and Naomi got in, her heart pounding. She was still nervous, still unsure of what this trip would mean. But there was also a part of her that was excited. She wanted this to work. She wanted to see where this could go. The drive to their destination was long, and as they left the city behind, Naomi found herself relaxing a bit. The scenery changed from concrete and buildings to fields and forests. Snow started to dot the landscape, and soon they were driving through a winter wonderland. Naomi watched out the window, her breath fogging the glass as she admired the scenery. David glanced over at her, smiling. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. Naomi nodded. "Yeah, it's like something out of a movie." David laughed. "I guess it is." He reached over, gently taking her hand. "I'm glad you're here with me." Naomi looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't quite name. She squeezed his hand, her voice soft. "Me too." They arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was small, nestled among tall pine trees, with snow blanketing the ground. Christmas lights were strung along the roof, and a small wreath hung on the door. It looked like something out of a storybook. and Naomi felt a sense of warmth she hadn't expected. David unlocked the door, pushing it open and stepping aside to let Naomi in first. The inside was cozy, with a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a Christmas tree in the corner, already decorated with simple ornaments. Naomi smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. It felt like home, in a way that she hadn't felt in a long time. David set their bags down and turned to her, his eyes hopeful. "What do you think?" Naomi looked around, her eyes taking in the little details. "I think it's perfect," she said softly. David's face lit up, and he stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "I'm glad. I want this to be special for you, Naomi." Naomi hugged him back, her heart pounding. She still had her fears, still had her doubts, but for now, she was willing to let herself feel this. She was willing to let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. They spent the rest of the day settling in, unpacking their things and making the cabin feel like home. David lit a fire in the fireplace, and Naomi made hot chocolate, the warmth of the cabin wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. They sat on the couch, sipping their drinks, the glow of the fire casting soft shadows on the walls. David looked at Naomi, his expression serious. "I know things haven't been easy," he said quietly. "And I know I still have a lot to figure out. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this." "To us?" Naomi looked at him, her heart aching with a mix of hope and fear. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe that, David. I really do." David reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'll prove it to you. Every day, I'll prove it." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them away, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Okay," she said, "but I'm holding you to that promise." David smiled, leaning in and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The next morning, Naomi woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Christmas music playing softly. She got up, wrapping a blanket around herself and padding into the kitchen. David was there, making breakfast, his hair still a mess from sleep. He turned and smiled at her, his eyes warm. "Good morning," he said. "Hope you're hungry." Naomi smiled, leaning against the doorway. "Depends on what you're cooking," she teased. David laughed. "Fair enough. I promise it'll be edible, at least." They ate breakfast together, the cabin warm and cozy around them. Afterward, they decided to explore the area, bundling up in coats and scarves before heading outside. The air was crisp, the snow crunching under their boots as they walked. David led Naomi down a small path, the trees towering above them, their branches heavy with snow. They reached a small clearing, and David stopped, turning to Naomi. "I've got a surprise for you," he said, a smile playing at his lips. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "A surprise?" David nodded, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a small box. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, her eyes widening. "David, what?" He smiled, opening the box to reveal a simple, delicate necklace with a small charm shaped like a leaf. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to give you something to remind you of this place, of us." Naomi felt her throat tighten, her eyes misty. She reached out, her fingers brushing the charm. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely a whisper. David stepped closer, his eyes soft. "May I?" he asked, and Naomi nodded, turning around. He clasped the necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin. Naomi turned back to him, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. David smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "You deserve everything, Naomi. And I'm going to spend every day making sure you know that." Naomi looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions she had been too scared to feel for so long. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, and leaned in, pressing her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, filled with all the things she couldn't say. David wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and, for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt like maybe, just maybe, she could trust this. She could trust him. They spent the rest of the day exploring, enjoying the quiet beauty of the snowy landscape. They laughed, made snowmen, and even had a snowball fight, their laughter echoing through the trees. It was simple, and it was perfect. That evening, they sat by the fire again, the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner. Naomi leaned against David, her head resting on his shoulder. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "You know, I think this might be the best Christmas I've ever had," she said. David looked down at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I'm glad, because it's the best one I've ever had too." Naomi smiled, her heart full. She still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, it was going to be okay. She had David, and he had her, and for now, that was enough. The night was quiet, with the snow falling gently outside the cabin windows. Naomi and David sat on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. The warmth of the room wrapped around them, and Naomi felt herself relax. There was something about being here, away from the noise of the world, that made everything feel simpler, clearer. David looked down at Naomi, her head resting against his shoulder. He shifted slightly, turning to face her. "You know," he began, his voice soft, "this is the happiest I've been in a long time." Naomi looked up at him, her heart tightening. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that he was showing her. She reached up, her fingers brushing against his cheek. "Me too," she admitted. "It feels different. It feels right." David smiled, leaning in closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I want this, Naomi. I want us. No secrets, no hiding, just us." Naomi nodded, her eyes misting. "I want that too. But I need you to be honest. About everything." David pulled back slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "I promise," he said. "No more secrets." Naomi looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and fear. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this could be different. She took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay." David leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. It was a gentle kiss, filled with all the things they couldn't say. Naomi closed her eyes, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. She kissed him back, letting herself feel the moment, letting herself trust. David pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, and Naomi felt herself relax into him. She could feel the warmth of his body, the strength of his arms, and it made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She broke the kiss, resting her head against his shoulder, her eyes closing. "Stay with me tonight," David whispered, his voice soft. Naomi looked up at him, her heart pounding. She knew what he was asking, knew what it meant. She hesitated for a moment, her fears bubbling to the surface. But then she looked into his eyes, saw the sincerity there, and she knew that she could trust him. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." David smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. He stood, holding out his hand to her, and Naomi took it, letting him lead her to the bedroom. The room was small, the bed covered in a thick, soft blanket. David turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice gentle. Naomi nodded, her heart pounding. "I'm sure," she said. David leaned in, kissing her softly, his hands resting on her waist. Naomi closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the moment, letting herself feel. She knew that this was a big step, that it was scary, but she also knew that she wanted it. She wanted him. They moved slowly, taking their time, exploring each other in the soft glow of the lamplight. It was gentle, filled with care and tenderness, and Naomi felt her fears slowly melt away. David was patient, his touch light, his kisses soft. He treated her like she was precious, like she mattered, and it made her heart swell with emotion. Afterward, they lay in the bed, the blanket pulled up around them, their bodies tangled together. David held Naomi close, his fingers gently brushing against her arm. Naomi closed her eyes, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It felt right, being here with him, and she let herself relax, let herself trust that this was real. David looked down at her, his eyes soft. "Thank you," he whispered. Naomi looked up, her eyes meeting his. "For what?" she asked. "For trusting me. For giving me a chance," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I know it hasn't been easy. I know I've made mistakes, but I promise you, Naomi, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you. Always." Naomi felt her throat tighten, tears welling in her eyes. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here too, David. I want this. I want us." David smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Good, because I'm not letting you go," he said softly. Naomi smiled, closing her eyes, her heart full. She still had her fears, still had her doubts, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. She had David, and he had her, and that was enough. The next morning, Naomi woke to the soft glow of the sun filtering through the curtains. She turned her head, finding David still asleep beside her, his arm draped over her waist. She smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. She gently shifted, trying not to wake him, but his eyes blinked open, and he looked at her, a sleepy smile spreading across his face. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," Naomi replied, her smile growing. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. "Did you sleep well?" David nodded, his eyes closing again. "Best sleep I've had in a long time," he said. Naomi's heart tightened, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She still wasn't used to this, to waking up next to someone, to feeling this kind of warmth and comfort. It was new, and it was a little scary, but it was also good. She liked it. She liked him. David opened his eyes, looking at her, his expression serious. "You know, I meant what I said last night," he said quietly. "I'm going to figure things out. I'm going to make this work, Naomi, for us." Naomi nodded, her eyes misty. "I know, and I'm here, David. I'm here." David smiled, leaning in to kiss her, his lips soft against hers. Naomi kissed him back, her heart pounding. She wanted this. She wanted him. And for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. They spent the rest of the day together, enjoying the simple pleasures of the cabin. They cooked breakfast together, laughed over burnt toast, and talked about their hopes for the future. David spoke of wanting to make changes, of wanting to be free from the life that had held him back for so long. Naomi listened, her heart swelling with hope. She wanted to believe that they could have a future together, that they could make it work. As the day turned into evening, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun set behind the trees. Naomi leaned against David, her heart feeling full and warm. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "Do you really think we can do this?" she asked. David looked down at her, his eyes serious. "I do. I know it won't be easy. But I believe in us. I believe in you." Naomi nodded, her eyes misty. She still had her fears, still had her doubts, but she also had hope. And for now, that was enough. As the night fell, they went inside, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the Christmas lights twinkling softly in the corner. Naomi looked around, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. David took her hand, leading her to the couch, and they sat together, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them. Naomi looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Merry Christmas, David," she said. David smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "Merry Christmas, Naomi." And as they sat there, the snow falling gently outside, the fire glowing beside them, Naomi felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if everything would work out, but for now, she was willing to trust, willing to hope. She had David, and he had her. And for now, that was enough. The journey ahead would be long, and it wouldn't always be easy, but they were in it together. And as Naomi looked into David's eyes, she knew that whatever happened, they would face it side by side. And for now, that was all she needed. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.